Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, how much is clean energy and green technology steering Nigeria's future? Well, the country has set ambitious targets for increasing its share of renewable energy, including electricity generation and overall energy consumption. It's put forward the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan aimed at achieving carbon neutrality by 2060. But to achieve this, Nigeria will have to be much less dependent on fossil fuels. And of course, a key part of that transition to clean energy is skilled labor. But it's not clear how many skilled people there are in the sector. Nevertheless, there are companies that are springing up in Nigeria with grand plans of how to get past existing roadblocks. Many, such as the company known as Smart Energies, are experimenting with innovative solutions and coming up with models which could set examples for the rest of the country. But they need good policies, and the question is, how assertive are the policies that are being rolled out by the Nigerian government to promote clean energy? Does Nigeria have a cutting-edge renewable energy plan? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the CEO of Smart Energies, Yinka Opeke, whose scope of interest includes clean energy innovation, inclusive economic empowerment, and sustainable entrepreneurship across Africa. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
That's a lot of hats you're wearing there. Although you're not actually wearing a hat, are you, at the moment? But let me start with it from a broad perspective. I mean, what's the pace of growth in the clean energy sector in this country?
Wow. Okay. So the pace, I may not have the empirical data in terms of actual numbers, but broadly speaking,
I mean, how quickly would you say Nigeria is transitioning away from fossil fuels, for example?
Okay.
Snail pace?
No. So considering the amount of attention that globally issues around climate change is having, even nationally, when you talk about the decade of gas and making gas a transition fuel, there's been a lot of awareness in terms of the different types of gas, even though we are in the LPG, which is liquefied petroleum gas,
yes,
popularly known as cooking gas.
Yeah.
You know, so based on the awareness, the advocacy, by the government, private sector individuals, non-governmental agencies, you would say that, it is picking up more than what it used to be, right? So I would say that, it's not where we want it to be, nowhere close it, but we're not where we started.
But let me ask you this, what's the essential difference, if any, between your company, for example, is called Smart Energy,
yes,
and clean energy?
Okay. So let me say now, the LPG part of what we do, prior to now, we were Smart Gas because we were focused essentially on cooking gas. And then we transitioned to Smart Energies this year because we expanded our operations to renewables.
Right.
Now, the smart part of what we do is just in our culture and in our business operations and how we leverage technology. But I think what's most unique about what we do is how we kind of like create our solutions, end-to-end solutions. So we're not just a gas company. We are not just selling cylinders. We create programs and products around it such that when we identify our sustainability collaborators, it's like plug and play. So I'll give you an example. We have a campaign we call Trash for Gas.
Right.
Now, for this kind of campaign, we give them gas in exchange for trash. Because typically when we started the advocacy in those communities, we just realized that the environment is littered because you're going to an underserved community, the environments are littered, the gutters are clogged and all that good stuff. And a typical cylinder, a 3 kg cylinder with the burner and the gas would retail for about maybe 29,000 naira. So we're like, as against just giving it to you for free, let's even task you to do something. So we will now give them recycle bags, we will teach them about trash segregation, and then we now take the trash in exchange for gas. Now, that is different because when you're leaving those communities, not only are you living with truckloads of trash, you're also transitioning the families, into cleaner forms of fuels. And if you give a family 1 cylinder, you have transitioned an average of 3 to 5 people to modern and clean energy. And that aligns with some of our, SDG goals because what we do, it hinges on SDG 5, 7, and 13, and 5 talks about issues around gender equality. And in this case, we're talking about taking the women from energy poverty to prosperity. And then we're talking about SDG 7 that talks about access to modern and affordable clean cooking, and then SDG 13 that talks about impacts of climate change, and that's a global conversation. So that, among so many other things that we do, we have a mobile app, we have mobile kitchens, so it's really in how we create our solutions that makes it easy for like-minded partners, to just plug into it.
Very interesting, actually, what you're saying. Sounds very innovative.
Thank you.
What about the regulatory framework
Okay.
in Nigeria? I mean, is that in place? Because you need to have that in order to, I suppose, promote investment in the sector, which you need in order to advance sort of clean energy and smart energy and all the rest of it.
Yes, I know that the government is, like I said, there's increasing awareness in this,
Right.
but there's one thing to have the policies, and there's another thing to ensure the implementation of the policies, because that now helps private sector investors, just like you have mentioned. So for example, if, for example, I want to set up a gas plant in a particular location, there are different regulators that will require certain permits. Now, if these regulators are not speaking to themselves, case in point, there was a time that we bought a land somewhere to establish a gas plant. At the time we bought the land, we thought we got an unofficial approval from the regulatory agency at the time, only for us to buy it, and then another agency said it's
What
not
a
suitable.
nightmare, eh?
So you can imagine.
Yeah.
So policies are one thing, but in terms of all the agencies really talking amongst themselves, it's going to help. Also, issues around culture and belief. I was speaking with one of the honorables somewhere from the north, a few weeks ago, and we're telling him about the intervention, bringing clean cooking to the women in his constituency, and he was like, they may frown at it because they're thinking, why are you coming to empower women? So there's a lot of advocacy that needs to go into that. There's a lot of campaign that needs to go into that, But to be honest, when we go to those communities and we do all those advocacy and things like that, those women are because the major barrier for them is affordability. So the moment you gift it to them, by virtue of your partners that have allowed that to happen, you now realize that it's easier for them to refill. But yes, the government has a big role to play, in terms of ensuring that there's an enabling environment for investors to come in, to ensure the adoption and the accessibility.
And part of what you were talking about there with the women is your way of trying to address the challenge of energy poverty in this country.
Correct. Yes. Wow. Where do I start from? So if the story of smart energies, to be honest, I think it was divinely orchestrated, because even though my friends would...
Well, you're in the right place. Nigerians are always talking about divine intervention.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I keep saying, I don't know why I'm just glued to Nigeria. Even when I came to establish it here, a lot of my friends abroad were like, Inka, people are looking for how to leave a country. You are coming here to establish a business, but sometimes
they're thinking, my God, you had the opportunity to Scarpa, and here you are.
So while it comes to these challenges, I absolutely enjoy what we do in the company. I have a great team, and our journey has been organic, and Nigeria is that place where you strategize today, you re-strategize tomorrow and next tomorrow, because the terrain is absolutely volatile. And if you're not careful and you're not adapting really fast and you're not flexible, your business can go down the drain. So where we are today wasn't really where we thought we would be. So back to the issues around the women, that's one of our product lines that is most rewarding for me, because it has made us a social enterprise. Because when you go to those communities, and you're giving these women cylinders, honestly, the love you get from them, the prayer you get from them, nothing beats it. So you go to bed every day knowing fully well that you have done your best. And a lot of all these women, that are using firewood and all that, when they tell you their stories, the amount of time it takes them. So you look at time poverty for the women and the child. When they go to the forest to get the firewood, they come, they break the firewood, they have to dry them. When it's raining, they cannot cook, the health implications, Some of them have, asthma triggered, the smoke triggers their asthma, they don't even know. Their eyes are teary, and then you now give them cylinder. So what we're asking for is not cold turkey switch, but we're saying you can use a cleaner form of energy. Now, I'd like to make a point, cooking gas is cleaner energy. The cleanest is actually renewables. Now you're talking solar and things like that. But sometimes some people think, gas is the cleanest.
It's a kind of transitional gas, isn't it?
Exactly. So we're just saying that transition, because on their own, when they start using the cooking gas, and it's raining, they can still make some noodles for their kids, you know, their pots are not black, you know, they now start seeing the benefits on their own, you know. So we go back for monitoring and evaluation, and you see that a lot of them are adapting it, even though they have the disposable income to just refill 1 kg at a time.
Right.
But you see that they now start to use it, you know. So the grassroots women, they're a key focus for us in terms of our interventions.
Right. Let me move beyond the very specific things that you've been talking about to kind of a broader pseudo-political area. Because,
Okay.
I mean, I know that you spent a bit of time in the United States.
Correct.
And I wonder whether you think this country may be losing whatever momentum it had towards the growth of clean energy, given the fact that countries like the US under President Trump are once again embracing fossil fuels and ditching clean energy policies. I understand that Mr. Trump's move is starting to influence some countries and energy companies who are saying, well, if the United States, you know, is going back to drill, baby, drill, which is the term that President Trump used, drilling for oil, I mean, who am I not to do the same?
So there's a lot of debate around that, to be honest. You know, some will tell you they want to get to the point where they're doing zero emissions, and some will tell you net zero. So those that are in the areas of net zero are those that are saying that I'm going to balance the amount that I'm emitting, you know, by removing them from the atmosphere. And some of the technologies they will use is things around tree planting, things around technologies for carbon capture, and then of course issues around carbon credits. But for those who want to do the zero emissions, saying that in the first place, I don't even want to emit any gas at all, they're looking at specific kind of products like electric bikes, which is part of the solutions that we offer as well, because for an electric bike there's no tailpipe emission, right, especially when you power it with solar.
Right.
So again, it depends on countries and their approaches, you know. Of course everybody knows that renewables will be the best because it's renewable, it's clean,
Yeah, but
and
how's
all
that
that,
working in
but
Nigeria?
in Nigeria, because it's not as affordable as the solid fuels, as you know, the gas, you know. A typical solar, like if you want to do like a 10 kVA solar now with a 5 kVA, 10 kilowatts battery and like a 5 kVA inverter, you'll be spending about 5, 6, 7 million. The average family might not be able to afford that, right? So when you look at the economic capacity, you know, of the average individual, considering the state of affairs in Nigeria, it might be a challenge, you know. But if, in my own personal opinion, you know, that is where we should be gravitating towards, you know. But the Western world, you know, and of course countries around Asia, around the world, they are at the efficiency stage. In Nigeria, we're still developing, you know, you're still taking people to transition. If you look at, based on the statistics from National Bureau of Statistics, they're saying that just about 19.4 families use LPG in Nigeria. And that means 1 out of every 5 families. That is pretty low. So we're still talking about transitioning from firewood. You know, out of the country, they would use firewood for cookouts, you know, to do their barbecues and things. But in their houses, they're already piped to gas or electricity. So we want to get to that part whereby the average home, you know, can have access to clean cooking and electricity, of course.
Of course, a key part
Yeah.
of that transition to cleaner energy, renewable energy, is skilled labor. I mean, does Nigeria have skilled people in that sector, or is it far from that?
I'm sure you can answer that question, but
Well, I mean,
would
you're the
answer, I
expert.
know. So just like every other sector, you know, there's a deficit in terms of manpower and human capacity, you know, generally across the country.
So how do you
Of
manage
course,
in your company then? I mean, you're coming up with all these innovations and things.
So it's
I mean,
just really about having, as a visionary of the company, you always have to have a good head on your head. I think that's the key thing. You are the key driver of the vision, and it's part of your responsibility to have a team that buys into the vision. So I'm not going to, so just before we started the interview, I was telling you how it's such a Herculean task doing
Yes.
business in Nigeria. So coming up and talking does not mean that, you know, you're not juggling a whole lot. You know, you're failing at some, you're learning at some, you know. So it's just a continuous exercise, you know. And of course, for us as well, you know, part of the things that help us, for example, collaboration is very important. So we are members of Women in Energy Network, for example. And sometimes when I am trying to recruit manpower, you can post on those platforms, you know, and people can give you recommendations and referrals. So there are no hard and fast rules to how you can get things done. But what I know is you need a team of people who believe in the vision, you know, for you to drive it. And you just continue to figure it out as you go.
And you talk about believing in the vision. One thinks of, you know, the kind of ideology that drives a person. I mean, are you in it for the business aspect of it, or do you see yourself as a kind of clean energy, climate activist sort of thing?
So, for starters, I see myself, I know I'm a serial entrepreneur for starters, you know, so regardless of the business, I'm that person that just likes to create value. So now that I've found myself in this sector, the only thing I would have to do is just to say, what differentiates you? How are you creating value? Because I know that money follows value. So I don't shy away from the fact that, you know, we're a for-profit business, we make money, but the value will be apparent to you. It's a win-win, and that's what makes it sustainable. So I think for me, it's not just the money. The money is a good motivation, you know, but that's not the only thing that drives me in business.
Right.
Yes.
So what do you see as the biggest barriers to the full adoption of clean energy in Nigeria?
Okay. So a couple of things. I'll say affordability, you know, I'll say accessibility, and based on those two, your strategy will be a function of your target audience. And I'd mentioned issues around the culture and the belief as well. I'm sure you have heard when people will even say that firewood jollof rice is better than gas, you know, jollof rice.
So that's like a woody taste.
I'm telling you,
smoky taste.
Thank you, smoky jollof. You know, so there's a
Now
whole
you're
lot
making
of
me hungry.
you know, so there's a whole lot of, you know, things around that people need to understand the concepts of clean cooking. So when we go and we're identifying our collaborators, we're speaking to them to partner with us, and some of them are talking about these things, we tell them that the key thing is to look at the effects of cleaner cooking, cleaner energy on the person who is using it and the environment before you talk about whether it tastes better or not, you know. And I tell them, you're a community leader, you're a national leader, you're a global leader. Your conversation should be around what is good for the people, you know. So to be honest, I feel like it's important for people to really understand the concepts of it, for them to adopt it in their own, you know, little way. Even things around just using energy-saving light bulbs and things. So every little helps. And I like the fact that a lot of private sector organizations, financial institutions are creating a lot of awareness in that space. You know, organizations are also looking for more sustainable ways of doing business, and also it's a collective effort for people to do. But for us, we learn every day and we look at what is happening in Nigeria. And I say, if you are able to thrive in business in Nigeria, I don't care where you go, you will thrive, you know. So we're happy to do.
I was going to ask you this. I don't know if I've already asked you this before, whether you partially answered it. If you did, I apologize for repeating it. But I mean, what motivated you to get into this sort of smart energy, clean energy business?
I would say that it was divinely orchestrated, without wanting to sound so spiritual. Because
yes, I do recall you using that phrase earlier.
Because I birthed it at the time I lost my dad in 2020, and I had seen him just at the onset of COVID.
Right.
I had seen him, and I traveled back to the States, and then it passed about 3 weeks after. And if you remember, all the airspaces were blocked. I couldn't come back home.
Yeah, that is true.
And you know, I was grieving at the time, and that was really when it started. So I can't really say, because I never thought of oil and gas, so never did, you know. So I would say that it was divine, but at the time I now came up with, okay, smart gas, and that's one thing about me. Once I have an idea, I'm very quick to frame it up. You know, I think that's just a gift that I have in terms of, okay, what? So at the time, it was almost like the world was just quiet for me to develop my business plan, as it were, because if you remember, for a couple of months, nothing was happening across the world,
that
right?
Is true.
You know, yeah. So I really can't pinpoint how I got into it, you know, but when I got into it, you know,
you got into the swing.
Yeah, yes, and it was timely, thank God, you know, like the policies were in alignment, it was gas transition, you know, so everything was working in alignment, and I'm happy about that.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your father, but I'm glad you came and talked to us tonight. Thank you very much indeed. Yinka Opeke is the CEO of Smart Energies. Her scope of interests include clean energy innovation, inclusive economic empowerment, and sustainable entrepreneurship across Africa. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.